Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Not That Bad, a movie podcast. My name is Connor, aka your stepdad's weird friend Gary, and I am here with a couple of interesting folks today. Of course, I have my normal, everyday, illustrious co-host Gabe Tice. Gabe, how you doing?
There you go, using the word illustrious again.
I got to do it, man. I want to get sued.
All right, all right. Thankfully, now that we've raised people's expectations for them to be disappointed, we are doing something new today, folks. If you've been following the program, it's always been me and Connor just yakking about nonsense and Rob Zombie movies. But today we have a guest on. This is a first for the podcast. Today we have Tony Crespo. Tony, how are you doing?
Good, guys. Thanks for having me on. I'm pretty excited.
Please tell me I said your name right. Did I?
Well, no, yeah, you totally said it right. Sorry, we all laughed at the same time. I'm like, what's going on? No, yeah, you said my name right.
Nice. Because people always butcher my name, my last name. So I'm always like super paranoid because I know what that feels like.
Yeah.
All right. We're thrilled to have you on. Of course, Tony is from probably my favorite YouTube channel to watch right now, Flopbuster. His co-host, Gabe, another Gabe, will be on the show in the future. So this is a part of a two-part series that we're going to be doing with Flopbuster. We're super excited to have you here. And we're going to be talking a movie that you actually picked today, Tony. You want to talk a little bit about the movie and what made you select it for this podcast?
Yeah. Well, I was going to pick The Flintstones with John Goodman, but I don't know if it would have fit the vibe of the podcast. So I didn't pick it because that movie has like a 2.1. I'm like, that movie's not that bad. But I picked Dead Silence. This is a movie that I remember being extremely excited for in my youth. It came out right when I was like in 6th grade, 7th grade. And I used to go to Little Horribles, which was this really cool store in my town in Berwyn. Getting the posters, seeing the promotional stuff for it. And it's James Wan. I think it's an unsung James Wan movie. I think it's one that people forget about. It was in theaters for like 16 days or something like that. The studio buried it very quickly. But I think it's a good precursor to stuff like Maligned, some of his more wild things, his B-movie style of directing as opposed to like the haunted house stuff. So I really dig this one, and I'm excited to talk about it.
I mean, I'm excited to talk about it because, you know, I'm a fan of James Wan and Leigh Whannell, but I hadn't actually watched Dead Silence. I was curious about it. You know, it has that reputation of being that bump in the road for their careers, but it does have its defenders. You know, you're not the first person I've heard to defend it. So yeah, it was finally time to sit down and watch this thing. Connor, had you seen Dead Silence before this?
So yes, Dead Silence was one that I had seen and heard things about forever. And probably 2015, 2016, there was a movie stop that used to be somewhat close to my house. I was a big fan of that store. I still have my rewards card on my keychain, even though they've been closed for years now. But I went into the store and decided to pick up Dead Silence, just thinking maybe, I saw the cover. I had heard some things about it, knew the director. So I said, you know what, let's just give it a try. From the director of Saw is on the cover. Why not go for it? And so I watched it years ago, and I've watched it quite a few times since then. Hadn't heard of it before. I just randomly, it might have been a friend that mentioned it, something like that. But picked it up, and I've owned the DVD copy since.
And that's so weird because this is their next movie after Saw, which is, that's one of those huge movies in horror that completely changes the game. There were Saw copycats everywhere, and they come out with this new movie, James Wan and Leigh Whannell. And yeah, like you said, Tony, the studio buried it, and there's a lot of production history to go in there. But I think what we should do is talk about what we all like about the movie before we get into that, because it definitely has a lot of merits.
Yeah, totally.
So why don't you start off?
Yeah, so sorry. For me, I think what I love about James Wan is when he's totally unfiltered. And in the horror genre, I really like when directors are just balls to the wall, throwing everything and the kitchen sink. And I think this 100%, the strong suit is James Wan's direction, the camera angles. At some point, he does a bunch of Sam Raimi-esque sort of things in this one car sequence with the crazy zoom ins. So it's all of his bag of tricks. It's dolls, it's clocks. He likes the knocking sounds, all those suspenseful build-ups. So yeah, I think it's James Wan is like the highlight for me. I could, there's also Donnie Wahlberg for some reason always shaving with his portable razor, but other than that, it's James Wan's direction, I think, is 100% in line with his other work. And I know you mentioned that they think it's a bump in the road, but I think James Wan totally brought it. And I think Malignant is a good example because Warner Brothers gave him like $40 million and said, here, go do whatever you want. And Universal clearly gave him $20 million to do whatever he wanted here. I mean, they might have been not so happy with the product after, but I think just the B movie feel of it all. It feels like something I would have seen on VHS way younger than when I saw it.
Cool. That's actually really interesting because I think the overall feeling that I walked away with is this is James Wan trying to do a ghost story, like a modern classic ghost story that 100 years from now people could be talking about. Like A Nightmare on Elm Street has that quality. It's Freddy Krueger, and I think they were looking to do something not more tasteful than Saw, but kind of show that they're not gore hounds, they're not torture porn guys. They're really interested in staying power. So Leigh Whannell specifically has a lot of problems with how this movie got made, and I think his vision for it is very different than what we ultimately saw. Knowing that the bits of his vision and James Wan's vision that I can see, I like. I mean, who doesn't like a creepy doll, right? I mean, oh my God, how many movies do they have with creepy dolls? It's like they're trying to monopolize the genre. But James Wan's visual style, Leigh Whannell's his ability to take these kind of old ideas and make them seem new again. Like creepy dolls are not, they're not new, but he really puts a whole new spin on them, a whole new idea on them. And I think he did that again with Insidious. So just in that kind of general overview, I just like how they did go for an original idea that they could claim as their own and that would establish them as not one trick ponies, but like they could do many other kinds of horror.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I see what you mean, Tony, about that sort of VHS feel. You feel like this should be a lot grainier than it is. You feel like it should be a lot sort of have that quality of picked up on video at the Blockbuster or the Hollywood Video down the road. And I really like that about it, but it also doesn't feel overly cheap. While some of the things about it do feel a little retro, maybe, you can definitely see shades of like cinematography cues and camera movements and color tones that you would see in later movies like Insidious, or even like moments that remind you of The Conjuring. So that direction, I mean, it without James Wan's direction, with how like the writing was, I don't know that this would have turned out to be the same movie. James Wan was a huge difference maker. I completely see that point. And to that, if I could introduce my first pro here, there's some genuinely creepy moments in this movie. Like there's some points that I guess, I could see where the audience would say, oh, that's a little laughable, or, that did not land with me. But there's some moments in this where your heart rate really will start going, and that suspense is built up the right way. And James does a great job of making his visuals as creepy as you would get in, let's say, the first Insidious film, even the first Conjuring movie. I think there's a lot of things that you can pick directly from this movie and say, okay, if that's not the inspiration, then he definitely sort of went back to the well for this one. And so I thought there were some really genuinely creepy moments. And Tony, I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
There are. One of my favorite moments in the movie is honestly the flashback. I think the flashback is a highlight of the film. I think it's perfectly like gothic, and what was it, the 1920s, I think that sequence is. I would have watched the whole movie just set in that time frame. So, and it's just James Wan again, like I said, you can expect a lot of things from him, but the one thing out of everything that you can expect is he's going to swing. He's going to make a giant creative swing. It's either going to work or it's not going to work. It's the same way swing that he took in Insidious Chapter 2. And there's a lot of people that love that movie, and a lot of people that go like it's like Shining Light or Poltergeist, you know.
Yeah.
But I think here it has the energy of, I call it like young filmmaker energy, where it's just like they're gonna do everything and everything they can to be flashy and showy. And I don't know what it is about James Wan, but I really like that. He's got that same sense of style that he had in a movie that came out the same year that he directed called Death Sentence, which I also think is extremely underrated and fits perfectly with movies like Death Wish. But yeah, I thought like even the twist is, you know, like it is what a lot of people say it is, but I think the effects work in this is awesome. It's just really, really cool. I just like the whole vibe of this movie just feels like somebody that just like wanted to have fun and make a good old fashioned horror movie, and they were just happened to get like big studio money to play with. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel that. And now, Gabe, I'm curious about one of the pros that you wanted to highlight. First off, what do you what do you got? What do you got here for us?
My big takeaway was the production design, and this goes to James Wan's direction. And obviously, he had a great team, but you know, so many directors could just say, just put him in an abandoned warehouse or something, or just in like an old creaky house. But I don't even know how to describe this place that they're at during the climax, but it's absolutely iconic in my mind. And that's where I feel like the atmosphere of this movie, the tone of this movie really shines through. To be honest, the first thing I think of is just them rowing their way through that mist, through that fog. That's why, like when I say that they're really trying to do something classic, like that is a classic Gothic image.
Yeah.
And even though, you know, James Wan is still very like, you know, this is a movie of its time, and he's certainly not afraid to indulge in any of his stylistic preferences, right? With like his camera work speeds up and the quick cutting and everything. But yeah, there's like a whole tone to this movie that I think he really nailed in the production design, in the set design. I think, like you said, Connor, there are some details in the movie. And I imagine this is like stuff that Leigh Whannell had to fight to keep in that really are chilling. I don't know if we want to get into spoilers, but there's particularly a revelation about why the doll killed the wife that I thought was particularly grotesque. And I guess if I can add another quick pro, and this is a terrible pro, but this movie was so mean-spirited that I kind of loved it.
So mean-spirited.
Yeah. It
That's
had the look of a, you know, a mainstream horror movie, but the soul of like a Rob Zombie movie. And, you know, and that's what we're about here. So yeah, two big pros right there.
Yeah, I mean, and hey, look, and I feel like there's a lot of things that you can look at in this movie to kind of grab, you know, and really take hold of. And if I'm gonna name a small one, just jumping off of what what we've discussed so far, I gotta highlight the character of Mary Shaw. You know, maybe it's not the greatest name, and maybe it's not. Maybe the lore is a little weird. Maybe there's some parts that they could have changed. But overall, I mean, first of all, the actress that played Mary Shaw knocked it out of the park. Yeah. She did so well in that role, and Gabe, to your point earlier, she does so perfect in that flashback sequence that it's one of those moments that's just genuinely creepy. You feel that, you know, sort of creep factor with this character. And the more you see her throughout the movie, the more you kind of realize like, okay, this isn't as much about the dolls as it is about her and what her weird perversions and psychotic nature. And then there's even a moment in the movie where you start to feel bad for this woman who's kind of freaked you out the whole movie. And then, of course, there is a revelation. And again, I think at this point, I mean, we are a spoilers podcast, so I can't really like avoid them. But the character of Mary Shaw, I mean, I felt like it was one of the strongest points of the movie, where I don't know if all the characters were super strong. I feel like this was the one that you could take away from this. And if you remade the movie, this is the one aspect that you could keep in there, and audiences would, I think, be very happy to see come back in a film that may be a little bit more acceptable for audiences. And Tony, I'm curious because of James Wan's direction, I think helped a lot with a character like this. And we see shades of Mary Shaw in the Bride in Black, or the Bride in Black in the first two Insidious films. So I'm curious, with the direction of James Wan and such, do you think that Mary Shaw could have worked in maybe say another director's eyes? And what did you think about it? Is that one of your pros as well?
No, yeah, she's 100% one of my pros. And I think the imagery that we're talking about is so unique to James Wan that I don't think, and I'm trying to think of directors at that time. I mean, I don't know if this material would have worked with like an Eli Roth or something like that. I think James Wan it's such a unique voice. And I think there's a reason why Hollywood at that time, was keeping him around to do movies like Insidious and Death Sentence and this. He's got a unique vision, and he's like cool. Like he's just, there's this ferocious energy about his work. Even that first Insidious movie, which is definitely more subdued. It's more of a, a poltergeist thing going on until the third act, and he goes full on James Wan. But yeah, the characters like this, like Mary Shaw. I mean, we talk about the woman in black character from Insidious. Yeah, it only works with his vision. I don't know what it is. He's really good at photographing old women with dried up, crusty makeup and big noses and stuff. I mean, the nun character.
Yeah.
It's crazy because we're gonna get into the negatives, obviously, and I think we'll get into the writing. But it's a movie that's constantly. I was entertained by, and just fascinated by the lore and like what a prequel or a sequel could have been.
Yeah, and Gabe, I'm curious. Is Mary Shaw on your list of pros as well?
I wish she made a bigger impression on me, to be honest, but she's really not. She's not what I took away from this movie, if that makes sense. I mean, I'm gonna do that unfair comparison, but I have to do it. Saw, Jigsaw. I mean, he has like less than 5 minutes of screen time, but I mean, there's no wonder why he went on to become the icon that he is. And Mary Shaw felt like she was, the writing process sounded like it was really messy, and I think her character got kind of lost in the shuffle. I mean, I kind of thought that they were really trying to push the ventriloquist dummy as being the face of the movie, the symbol of the movie, and Mary Shaw was kind of just a part of that backstory. I mean, whenever she shows up on screen, it's a creepy effect. Old ladies are creepy. I think we can all agree.
Yeah.
Just calling out old ladies. Hey, that's our second demographic. We talked about in a previous episode that we have a strong demographic of rich white females. Now you're going to piss off the old ladies.
The old ladies.
We're going to have no audience. So I'm sorry, Tony, that we're having you on at the time that Gabe just pisses off our entire demographic. But
yeah, I say something cancel worthy every episode. So beware. Yeah. I wanted to bring in my last positive, and this is a weird positive because it's more mixed, but I just like the fact that Donnie Wahlberg is in this movie. I'm not even sure if I like his character or I like the way they wrote his character, but it makes me happy. I especially love it when there's like clearly like a family or a group of these like horror actors and directors who just love working with each other, that he's obviously coming here after Saw 2, which he's great in, by the way. I think that's like an awesome performance in Saw 2. But I just love that, what do you call it? Intertextual relationship between all of these movies. It's just, as a fan, it was really rewarding to see. I have other things to say about his character when we get to the negatives, but I mean, yeah, let's touch on the characters, of our band of characters. What jumps out to you guys as positives?
For me, Mary Shaw for sure. Jamie didn't leave the biggest impression on me.
Yeah.
He's kind of just he pushes the story forward. I'll say that. But man, like the one thing I was thinking about with his character, I feel like was a missed opportunity, was just going full Sam Raimi mode with that. Just keep torturing this guy over and over. Get somebody a bit more charismatic. But that's like if I was in charge of that, But Donnie Wahlberg, I don't know what the hell he's doing, but it was entertaining. I don't like it. I don't know what the whole gag was with him shaving, and I don't know why he's got to follow this guy. I mean, I've never seen a cop really do this, but he's just obsessed with it. So he provides some great comedic relief. But I like that everybody in this movie, and this goes back to the gothic tone, is that there's this feel about it where just every character comes off very creepy, even the ones that aren't threatening are creepy as well. So that was one of my takeaways too, just like the mortician, and what was it, his sister or wife?
It was his wife.
Was it his wife? Like I really enjoyed their scenes most. He was a very compelling character because he has history with Mary Shaw, so there's a bit more going on with him. And honestly, I was like locked into his scenes more than the main character.
Oh, I mean, I could not agree more. I'm not, you know, and I'll get into this in the negatives. I'm not a big Jamie fan. That's, you know, I guess I'm 1-1 with Jamie's in horror movies, but he's in the losing category there. I'm not a big fan. But once you get into this town and you start to kind of be around these characters that are, and even, you know, and I got to say this, and it might sound weird at first, but I feel like even the characters that are off screen that you never meet, that you just sort of hear about, I feel like help drive the story. There's a scene where Donnie Wahlberg talks about how nobody's ever heard of this legend of Mary Shaw, and nobody's ever heard of this Mary Shaw person. Nobody confirmed any of this. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to throw into the script. And while we will definitely be getting into the writing a little later, it's a good thing to do because it makes the town a character in itself. And when you do that and you do it, you know, in the right way, and I think it was done in the right way in this movie, the town sort of creates its own sort of character to it, and it's got this this way of driving the story forward. So besides the, you know, character of Mary Shaw, and I will say I think the old man and his wife were awesome. I thought it was a great addition to the movie and somebody to be sympathetic for, because I wasn't as sympathetic for our main character. I thought, you know, besides those actual characters, I think that the town built it up more than anybody could have, even with just a small single seemingly throwaway line of dialogue. I felt like it added a lot of lore that we could explore in either a sequel or, like I said, a remake of some kind. I am, you know, fully for remakes and sequels, and I think that this is a movie that would benefit from either one. So that's where I'll leave the character section. But I want to bring something up real quick because I know that was your last pro there, Gabe, and I'd like to throw in one pro that I hadn't heard from you guys yet, and I don't know if this is going to land on the pros for you guys or not. I really dug the score. It was very Saw-esque. But there's that addition of that sort of music box, which, let's just say it, the theme song for this movie has outlasted and outshined the movie. When you go on like a TikTok or Instagram or Facebook and you watch scary videos, this is a song you hear in those videos, but nobody's talking in the comments like, oh shit, that's the theme song from, you know, Dead Silence. Nobody's saying that because nobody knows it. And so I think the score is so good, and Charlie Closer did such a good job with the Closer, I don't know how it's pronounced. I'm just going to say Closer. It did such a great job, in my opinion, with making it not only creepy during the scenes that were supposed to be very tense and suspenseful, but he separated it enough from Saw where it could have belonged, but it did feel a little out of place for the Saw universe. But that main theme, man, that just did it for me. I'm curious to know your guys' perspective. I guess, Tony, if you wanna kick that off.
So I'm with you because I kept thinking about the theme throughout the movie, and I don't remember. Like, I've seen this movie a handful of times, but it's been years. The last time I saw it was maybe 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
But on this watch, that was one of the things that stuck out most to me. It even gave me like a bit of Exorcist vibes too.
Yeah.
But I really dug it. I thought even the whole sound mix and the soundscape, I mean, I thought was super strong. Even with the jump scares and stuff, like I thought all of it was really good. And that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. I was like, this sounds familiar. I know it's from this movie, but I was like, I know I've heard it somewhere. But it's crazy that on YouTube, TikTok, people do use this a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Gabe, what you say about the score?
It's not a con. It's not anything I would complain about. For some reason, it didn't make as big of an impression on me, but that could be because cultural osmosis has normalized me to it, if that makes sense. Like
I got you.
If you're used to hearing something, especially on TikTok, like TikTok might be the perfect way to ruin a song for me.
Yeah.
Easily. Oh my God.
Yeah. And you brought up Saw, and I think Saw, like, and this doesn't get talked about. Saw has like one of the greatest theme songs to a horror movie I can think of.
Yeah. It's one of my favorites. Especially like they definitely made some changes to it over time, but it's same composer who did the Saw score carried the load for this one, and you do feel it, but I agree. I think both of them are pretty underappreciated scores. I mean, people listen to these and can recite these from memory. Basically, they can do the little theme, but usually they don't know where this one came from, and with Saw they don't really acknowledge it until it's brought up.
Yeah, so that's crazy. I think definitely Saw, I would put like, that's like a Halloween John Carpenter level score of the new millennium. And this score, I don't think it's on that level, but
fair.
Still it does contribute to the idea that this man is insanely talented, this composer.
Yeah.
So yeah. And it's not like it was like wallpaper. Like that's something John Carpenter says. It definitely added to the ambiance. It wasn't stuck in my head afterwards. I'll put it that way.
That's fair. I mean, it's one of the things that will definitely play into an opinion that a lot of people do have on the movie a little bit later on when we talk about the common complaints that people have, or the ugly section of our podcast. But I just got one more pro that I want to bring up, and I don't think any of you are going to agree with this, so I'm just going to throw it out there. I really dig that this is one of those movies that, the first time you watch it and the second time you watch it are kind of two different experiences. Because of the twist, there are things that you will notice a little more when you watch it in the second time around. Maybe I wasn't as observant the first time I watched the movie, and that's why I enjoy it so much now, knowing some of the things that are going to be coming with the story and the twist. But I thought that was a huge pro, that, it was one of those movies, and I am in no way comparing quality here. So don't jump down my throat when I say this, but a movie like Get Out has that rewatch value where you watch it the first time, and when you watch it the second time, it's a bit of a different movie. Every action has a different meaning to it, and it feels different when you watch it that second time. And I feel like on a much smaller level, so don't, hear me out here. On a much smaller level, this movie is like that. There are parts of this film that the first time you watch it, you may not be as observant to what's going on, but the second time, what's happening, and it makes a lot more sense to you why some of these weird things are happening. And I'm curious, I'll start with you, Gabe, this time, just to see it. Is this something that you would even remotely put near the pros column, or something that you observed, obviously not having seen the film before?
I mean, I've only watched it once, so it's really hard for me to say. I think any movie with a twist is going to feel different rewatching it, if the twist is even substantial in any way, whether or not it's a good twist. So I could definitely imagine how much it would change. I hate to get ahead into cons, but that twist was not something that really demanded a rewatch. It's not something that made me say, well, I cannot wait to watch, like The Sixth Sense, everybody had to watch it a second time. That was not my experience. But that's just another example to me of James Wan swinging for the fences and, creating a rewatchability for his movies, because I can tell that matters a lot to him. Mm-hmm. He's not a one and done guy. He wants to have a shelf life.
Yes.
Staying power. So I mean, I'm not gonna put it as a pro. I would really have to actually watch it on the second time, and then I guess retroactively edit my answer into this video.
No retroactive statements on this podcast. That's a rule I'm instituting. But Tony, as a guy who has seen this movie, I mean, you had seen it previously, and this time, was this your second watch, or have you seen it a few times?
Maybe third.
Okay.
I saw it when it came out, maybe once, like about 5-6 years ago, and then now. The twist it's weird because I don't know. There's like certain twists in horror movies around this time frame where they happen, and I feel like they just happen, and you don't have any like emotional connection to it or go, like there's nothing to that. It's just like, oh, okay, that all right, sure. That's I put that movie in this category, I think for sure. It didn't really change my opinion on the rest of the film. I don't think like it comes out of left field. I think on paper it sounds like a neat idea. I like the idea that obviously she was controlling the father the entire time and stuff. I'm like, it kind of like, again, it goes back to the Malignant comparison where it kind of throws logic all out the window. But yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about the twist. It's not like it's not something I would say sticks with me about the movie. It's just I feel like it's more tacked on than anything else.
Well, speaking of the twist, I think that brings us to the cons.
I would say definitely the character development, like all the character work in this, besides Mary Shaw, is a bit dull.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's, I mean, I like to give myself little bullet points, and that's the second one I put down. The acting and the writing were not great, and like you said, when you're a writer and when you've done screenwriting work before, man, you really hate to see somebody criticize your work when you already know that it's not that great. And that's kind of like a weird feeling that I feel like only writers can sort of relate to, is like when you don't like something that you do, you want people to kind of come to you and tell you how good that work was so that you can be like, oh, you know what? Like, I didn't like it, but at least other people did. When you write something that you don't really love and then the general opinion seems to agree with you, it's heartbreaking. And I really don't want to be that for a filmmaker and writer as talented as Leigh Whannell, who would go on to write much better scripts, who would go on to direct some really great movies. I really hate to harp on it, but it's absolutely true. And even if, I think the acting and the writing really did detriments to each other, because while James Wan became a pretty good character director or actor director, as people would say, I think Tarantino is like a shining example of somebody who just brings the best out of everybody that he works with. Tony, I know you're a huge fan of Tarantino, so you can agree. It just brings the best out of the people in the movie. But I think horror is kind of hard to do that in. And I think early in his career, I don't know that James Wan could really do that. I mean, Saw had some great actors in it to begin with. So he didn't really have to draw it out of him, but this one had some people that weren't really huge. In fact, if you go on Letterboxd and select a lot of these actors and actresses, their top work is Dead Silence. So the acting didn't do favors for the script that wasn't great already. And the moments where the acting could have potentially shined, it was kind of dulled by a poor script, in my opinion. And Gabe, as somebody who has pretty successfully released a movie that you wrote, what do you think about the writing? Is that also a con for you?
First off, I'm really offended by this discussion because I'm a huge Ryan Quanten fan. I just man, this man's body of work. Actually, I was saying he's in True Blood, so he went on to do some other cool things. Good for him.
Good for him.
Jokes aside, snarky jokes aside, gosh, so acting and writing, there's a lot to unpack there. I love to start with the writing because I'm a writer too, and I have an idea of how Leigh Whannell felt. So I might be biased because Leigh Whannell follows me on Twitter, and I would hate for him to unfollow me.
Me too. I don't want him to unfollow me either.
But and I consider he's like one of my favorite working screenwriters, period, basically. Definitely within genre, right? Upgrade, Insidious, his Invisible Man remake, for sure. Yeah, so, and I don't know what his original vision was. I don't know what the studio demanded, but it's interesting, Tony, that you said that this is like James Wan going all out, which I think it is true for his part. But on the flip side, I feel like this is a very muted script. I think the screenwriting it's not restrained, it's held back probably by whatever studio influence was going on. They let him have his few moments of demented, macabre, whatever you want to call it, genius. And those are the moments where you just imagine, like, if Leigh Whannell made this today, had the control that he would today, we would be seeing a much more interesting movie. But as it is, it's just it's tame, in my opinion, and they put a muzzle on him as a screenwriter, which is terrible because he's a guy who knows what he's doing. So if he wants to go hard, if he wants to really go for something, he knows how to execute that. So it was a shame that unfortunately his writing got compromised. People can take shots at the dialogue and some plot conveniences. I'm not interested in like going through that. This is a horror movie from the mid 2000s. Mm-hmm. Now the interesting thing is the acting, right? These guys usually have a very interesting cast of characters to work with, and it feels weird that they did the Jamie character this way. Like, this is not like a James Wan hero. This is like he seems like plucked right out of one of those generic horror remakes going on at the time, So I feel like that's probably another studio note, like, hey, we don't want like some weird, bizarre, like we want somebody who will not offend people, who we can put on a poster. I don't know. Just I agree with pretty much everything you guys were saying as far as his character goes. And yeah, I mean, gosh, what else is there even to say? I mean, this is the most bland part of the movie, right?
Yeah, I mean, easily. And to that point, and this is something that I actually brought up in our last episode, but I gotta just throw this in there because it's a very small con. Again, it's something I weight pretty heavily, but I scale it back because I know it's an unfair criticism. But this movie is absolutely a time capsule for 2005, 2006. It's I mentioned it off camera, but I have a sort of timeline for horror movies, and there's like a BS, which is before Saw, and an AS, which is after Saw. And I think there's a period of like maybe 3 years after the first Saw came out that every single movie felt like Saw. It felt like Saw, it acted like Saw. And I feel like this kind of has that. I mean, it has a very similar color shading. Of course, it doesn't help that it's the same director and writer. It has that problem for me because I'm not a huge fan of a lot of horror films that came out in 2006. And I think a lot of ones that came out around that time were not stylistically the best. Maybe they were good movies. I'll throw See No Evil into the mix of a movie that had a lot of potential, a lot of good things going for it, but also had this sort of weird time capsule style to it that just didn't do the film any favors. So I know that that's probably not something that either of you thought while watching the movie, but that's something that always bothers me about movies that came out like in that time period, as well as like the 2010s, as I mentioned in the Wolfman episode. So we don't have to harp on that too much. I'm curious if either of you have a comment on it, but other than that, I just needed to throw that in there to just get that off my chest. Not a big fan for
no, let's harp, Connor. I want to do some harping. I will say harpist? I mean, that's to me where the casting for the lead comes in, because I kind of alluded to this. This to me felt like a generic casting choice of that time. Like a bunch of actors like him were getting lead roles in these mid-tier horror movies all the time. I have no idea why. It was a really great time to be a mediocre white guy. So yeah,
man, I wish I would have been acting during that time. God damn it! Mediocre white guys like me would have been shining then. Why couldn't I have come around that time, man? I'm pissed.
You just you needed an all-American rejects haircut.
I know. What the hell, man?
You'd be good to go.
I was too young. This is bullshit.
So I really like. It's weird. There's certain movies where I'm just like, depending on their time frame, I'm just like, oh, this kind of rules. And I think it's just nostalgia.
Yeah, of course.
Where it's just like, I remember going to Blockbuster and renting this, and like the Dimension movies. I'm like, they're not great, but the Dimension knockoff slashers of Scream, I'm like, they have that late 90s Dawson Creek feel. And for some
100%.
reason, I really like that. And then when it comes to this, I think of movies like Stay Alive with like Frankie Muniz and stuff. They all have that same color tone and palette.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say they're great movies, but I would say, it takes me back to just being in middle school and seeing these for the first time, renting them, just like even the cover for this was eye-popping, like renting that from Blockbuster for the first time. And that's like, yeah, so for me, that weird mid-2000s feel with a generic white dude protagonist it's a plus for me, because I wanted to be the generic white guy in these movies as a kid. Yeah.
Well, and I get there's a lot of merit to that too, because like movies are a lot about how they make you feel. You could have a movie that's fantastic. I mean, cast is great, acting's great, script is great, but if it doesn't make you feel, sometimes you walk away and you think like it's a waste of potential. And I think that helps you so much in certain movies, where for me, I was not watching horror movies at that time. My parents didn't let me near horror. Okay. At that time, the only horror movies that I had seen was like Halloween 4 and 5. And I watched it on AMC when they were outside. So it was like, I didn't touch horror until I was like past that time period, even past like the 2010s, when I was like 20, I didn't start watching horror movies until like 2011. So like, I did not grow up in that time period. And while I only knew like certain horror movies because of the trailers, like I remember the trailer for Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, obligatory Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 reference. I remember that trailer. I remember the trailer for Friday the 13th when that came out. I remember that Nightmare on Elm Street remake when that came out. See No Evil, of course, I knew. I was a huge wrestling fan, so I saw trailers for that shoved down my throat every week as a kid. But I didn't watch these horror movies, so I didn't get that same feeling, that sense of nostalgia. I think I will get to that point eventually. So I think that's a really interesting point that you made there. But yeah, as of right now, I had to put that in the cons. And Gabe, I know that last time you talked about how, and I got to kind of toot my horn here, how you said it was nice of me to to not weigh it as heavily as I wanted to. And I'm curious in this is, do you have any feelings about that era of horror movies, sort of post-Saw movies that kind of all felt generally the same?
Well, I was a small child when all this was going on, so I thought that this was the scariest shit out there. Every time I would go to the movie theater and see the latest poster for like the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, I remember seeing the Seed of Chucky poster real clear and thinking like, damn, this is a whole nother level of movie. And one day I'm gonna be old enough to see that,
Yeah, that was the appeal, especially in Blockbuster. Like walking through Blockbuster in those aisles. That's something that kids now won't experience. But walking through those aisles and seeing a poster that gave you nightmares for like 6 weeks, that was like, it's a great feeling.
And then you grow up and you see the movie and you're like, oh, well, it's actually kind of bad.
Oh God, what the fuck was I thinking?
Yeah, I remember seeing a poster for Leprechaun Back to the Hood. And
that's a great movie.
We're actually, and I'm previewing this right now, we're gonna do an epic Leprechaun series overview. One not that bad episode for all the Leprechaun movies, baby, because I'm ready to talk some Leprechaun.
Good luck to you guys. Dear God, it's it's a lot. No, I actually do like Lep in the Hood up to no good. I think it's pretty fun.
Yeah. But this movie, right? This movie, it just, I hate to say this because, I mean, it gets a lot of things right about production value and other things, but still, I don't walk away with a lot of personality from this movie. And that's like a weird thing to say. And I'm trying to even put my finger on it. I mean, definitely, it comes down to the writing, to the execution. I like plenty of horror movies with bland protagonists, protagonists who are just utilitarian and functionary, the director's the star. But for some reason, there's still something about this movie, right? So, and whatever those reasons are, I'm sure that's the reason that James Wan and Leigh Whannell don't really, I mean, they have moved on to bigger and better things and have taking this as a lesson to be learned from Dead Silence. So I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to talk about bland things at the end of the day. Like what do you really say about it other than it didn't make that much of an impression?
It just doesn't make an impression. Yeah. With this movie, and we've talked about it before, because you made a movie and I know Connor writes, and I've made some things and I've written plenty of screenplays, but this movie felt to me, as much as I had fun watching it because I think it does have a mean streak to it. It has this nihilistic feel to it, and I just really love James' style. I just he's balls to the wall, just throws everything out there. But something I will say about the writing and the storytelling in this is, I feel like, and you guys have probably experienced this when you write something, a screenplay, right? And you think, oh, that I think that was pretty good, and then you get that discouragement because it's just the first draft, and then you throw it to the side maybe, and then later you take some ideas from that and put it into something else. I feel like this was a movie that it's that screenplay that you would have thrown away with the bland character and some really cool scares, but they just so happened to make the movie. But then they recycle a lot of the good material into better movies like Insidious and The Conjuring. That's what this movie feels like. It just feels like a test run. It feels like a test run for what is to come. For James Wan, not so much for Leigh Whannell. He luckily got to do, the Insidious movies. But I feel like, I don't know, I relate to that feeling that you guys are talking about, especially that struggle. Yeah, it's just like, I've written characters that are muted because I thought that was the perfect choice for the story.
Yes.
But sometimes it's not the right choice. You could make a really entertaining film, and if the main character doesn't grab the attention of the audience, then what will? Like Drag Me to Hell, I would say, one of my favorite horror movies ever. The main character doesn't have this huge lasting impression, but what's so perfect about what Sam Raimi does is he's like, she's my Bruce Campbell. I'm just going to torture the shit out of her for 90 minutes and use her to the fullest effort of comedy, and I feel like that's where this movie really should have done it. Just like fucking torture this guy, because the tragedy isn't really grabbing us. And I thought that was the major missed opportunity there. It's just, it feels like a bunch of great ideas that they use later on, but man, just like, this is one of those movies where I feel like looking at it as an adult now, I'm like, man, there's a couple things here. If you change it around, expand the lore, and really just knock the writing out the park with that main character, it could have been something special. But
I mean, I kind of want to add something there because I like what you're saying about the Sam Raimi approach. I mean, that could have been one direction for this movie, but there is an idea here to this character. His wife was killed. He's going to get blamed for it unless he can prove that this, fantastical reality is there, that this doll killed it. I mean, it's potentially a really interesting character arc, but he's not a relatable character because he does not respond to things the way any of us would. And he comes from a small town with this creepy doll legend, and instead of acting traumatized or like that has had a lasting impression on him, he's a very generic man. But then, like his wife dies, and he is very much more interested about these dolls and about the history of this town than remembering what he loved about his wife and cherishing the memories they had together. I just think it's a really tricky thing to use the dead wife thing, because it's something that you do have to construct in a way to get the audience's engagement. You can't just call this woman the wife and then kill her and expect our sympathy to be with the main character. It's just not how that works. And she has like all of like 5 minutes of screen time before she gets it. So
well, I want to say too, like, it does feel like you could have just called her the wife in the movie. Like that could have been her name in the credits, and it wouldn't have done anything different for the film. And I want to say too, and I want to kind of blend this with sort of another con that I have, but when you watch Dead Silence, there's something that I don't know if everybody has seen, but to your point of like throwing a little bit of more torture at this actor or at this character, believe it or not, they actually had a glimpse of that in the alternate ending of the movie. There's an alternate ending. So if anybody hasn't gotten the spoilers that we've gotten so far, in order to discuss this alternate ending, I do have to give some spoilers here. So spoiler alert, if you're really interested in seeing this and you're not spoiled so far from what we talked about, please go watch this before you continue this podcast. But there's an alternate ending of the movie where we get a little bit more explanation as to why his stepmom character became the way that she was. Of course, in the twist, it's revealed that she was assisting, in a way, Mary Shaw to kind of take over and destroy this family that killed her. But we actually get some explanation in that in a deleted scene that I really wish could have been blended with our current ending. It was an alternate ending. It's explained that that she was being beaten by this father character and was on sort of her last whim, and the Mary Shaw spirit sort of took advantage of her and talked to her about how she could make it better and she can make it, but she ended up taking over this mother character. And that's why she, at the end, has that Mary Shaw face come out. And it makes a lot more sense. We're not even going to really get fully into that right now, because I want to just say they did include a scene where this character survived for a while. And he was sort of tortured, and he was on this like couch tied up, and she was going to take this family photo with the father, who's a puppet now, and the wife, who's, fucked up. They were going to take this family photo, and that's when she gets him and kills him. And then, everybody's got their fucked up faces. Then there's the doll, and then there's her with Mary Shaw's face. They didn't get to finish the scene, but I'll tell you, I don't know if it would have worked, because this actor could not have carried the load. In the deleted scene, alternate ending, whatever you want to call it, it's completely laughable. The acting is horrible. I would not even give it like CW levels of acting. I would say like Fetish Dolls Die Laughing levels of acting. Just horrific. I don't know how. I see why they scrapped it, because if that's the best take that they could get, what they included in this alternate ending, it was not great. So I see that point, but I want to transition that to the con, that I don't think we get enough explanation for the ending of the movie. And if that explanation would have been in there, I think that would have made it a little bit better to know why this happened. Because truthfully, and this might be controversial to people who've seen this, but I don't mind the twist. I don't hate it at all. I think the twist is really interesting until you get to the part where it's this stepmother character that's his most recent wife of the father of our main character, right. Jamie. There's no motivation explained. She's just all of a sudden Mary Shaw, I guess, and she is in control. There's no explanation to it when you watch the movie, and it leaves the twist feeling empty because it feels lazy. It feels like there's no substance to it. And if we would have gotten more context to what happened, or sort of like an explanation as a part of that little sequence of events that led up to the very ending scene of the movie, it could have helped tremendously with how we walked away from the twist. And so I want to throw to Tony first, because I know that you've mentioned the twist a few times as kind of a low point for you. Do you think context would have helped something like this, or do you think that really the twist was just sort of a wasted opportunity?
No, I think context would have helped a big amount. And I honestly didn't know this deleted scene existed, and I watched the unrated cut. I'm not even sure what the difference would be. It was 92 minutes. But no, yeah, I mean, that makes a lot more sense now thinking about it too. And it would play it out better, because there's this, again, it goes back to that nihilistic dark sense of humor. There's a mean streak the movie has. And I think it would play better with that as well. Which, again, I keep comparing to Malignant, and if they really shot for that tone, like that's the big difference between Malignant and this movie. Malignant does have very ham-fisted dialogue, and it has the crazy twist and all these things, but it has a bunch of actors that are game to what the tone is. And the actor playing Jamie, just like, I don't know what movie he thinks he's in, but it's not this one. But man, that twist would, I feel like, fill in the gaps perfectly. Yeah. I don't think it would. It's like not the best twist in the world, but hey, it adds to, again, that tone that was set already.
Yeah.
That, like, okay, I believe that would happen. Like, sure, in this universe, in this story, totally buy it. But now I got to seek out this deleted scene.
Yeah, it's if you have the DVD, I don't know what copy that you're able to see, but I have the DVD copy. It's the unrated cut. But in the extras, there's an alternate ending, and it's got this extra context in there that really made the ending help. And I don't think that would have been the right way to go with, Jamie being tied up on the couch and this weird family photo being taken. I still would have liked to see the ending that we ended up getting. But adding that context would have been so, people say context is key. And while sometimes I think horror, you can sort of work with the audience by not giving them the full context. And a perfect example being Halloween or Saw, where you don't get those. And Saw, I think, is another perfect example to compare this movie to, because it came out around the same time, same director, same writer, same concept with this big twist. But in Saw, you walk away from it remembering that twist. And that's what you remember. You remember how impactful it is. And with this, you don't really walk away with that. And it doesn't help that you have no context. And Gabe, I know obviously you haven't seen this alternate ending either, but I know this is a con for you as well, based on what you've said. And I'm curious, how do you sort of feel about this context being added? Do you think it would have helped your enjoyment?
Okay, so when I watched the ending of this movie, I was like, damn, they wanted to do Saw again. Oh man, they are riding the Saw high, it's even like they shoot it the exact same way, the way the camera spins around, intercut with these like news reports, the voiceover,
and that weird like sped up head movements. I don't know what it was about movies in
that's
that
a
time
James
period, but
Wan
there's like the
thing. I don't know if he does that anymore.
Everybody ripped it off around that time, where the head, like they do that sped up where the head's moving 1,000,000 miles an hour and it's just like the body's not moving.
There's
that
it's very 360
strange.
shot for Saw, the bear trap, right?
And they do that in this too. You're exactly right.
So stylistically, I don't even think, frankly, I was happy with how they executed it. I just hey, more context would obviously make it better, but I think the twist falls on the burden of us even remotely caring about the main character, and I don't know if there's enough context in the world to make me do that, so that's a very snarky response, but ultimately it's just the movie could have ended 5 minutes before with him escaping that fire, and I actually think that would have been fine. Maybe fans would have been disappointed, they expected more, but I would have preferred that sort of closure to this very afterthought attempt at a twist, which is how it felt. I'm not saying it was literally an afterthought, that's how it was executed. So depending on how they executed the context, maybe, but for a twist to really succeed, you have to plant the seeds throughout. That's really the key here. It's not just about how much explaining can you do in the last 5 minutes, right? It's about going back to the first act, reestablish it in the second act. The Sixth Sense, the gold standard of twists, like there's like a little seed planted like every 10 minutes, every time Bruce Willis enters a room. So I don't know. It's just not a twist that I think was going to be maybe it would be salvaged, but not turned into something that was going to compete with the likes of Saw.
And that's completely fair. And it's and like I said too, I cannot compare it to the level, because Saw is a perfect example of a twist that works, and this is a perfect example of a movie that, for some people like myself, I think it'll work a little bit more than it will for others, but there's that missing element there. And it really doesn't do it any favors. But Gabe, I'm curious, what other cons do you have for this movie? We haven't gotten too much into your cons yet.
That's because, to be honest, my cons are so uninteresting to talk about, because they're all about just how bland I find so many things in this movie. It's really tragic. And there's a few stuff, I guess, in the ugly. We talked about the twist basically, but it's not like I was ready to tear this movie a new one or fall on my sword for it. I think the tragedy is just that we'll never see that original vision from Leigh Whannell and James Wan. So my con ultimately goes to those studio hacks who thought they knew better than the two guys who just made Saw, just made one of the most profitable movies ever made, and told them how to run their show. Like, no, these guys they're the ringleaders. They know what the fuck they're doing. And that has been borne out by the amazingly lucrative careers that they have enjoyed. So I think everybody learned something here. Leigh Whannell and James Wan learned to do their own thing, and hopefully the studio learned, fuck, we could have had the Saw guys on our team, and now, you know, it's like they went off to work with a bunch of other people who respected their vision.
And rightfully so, because they had that vision and they had that ability. And I'm glad that they're able to show that, because, you know, if you base it off this movie at the time, you could have, you know, audiences and executives could have seen them as a one-hit wonder. You know, they made the short that led to the Saw movie. Lionsgate picks up Saw and it shoots it to the moon. It shoots Lionsgate pretty much to the moon. And I'll say, you know, I think Saw and the filmmakers for Saw, you know, both everybody involved pretty much has thanked movies like House of a Thousand Corpses that came out before, and truthfully did thank these movies, because, you know, audiences weren't accustomed to films like this, where, you know, I think House of a Thousand Corpses at that time was one of the first movies to sort of bring back the real brutality in horror movies, and Saw just took that and shot it to the moon along with Lionsgate. And I'm really disappointed that they didn't get to do that in this one. But as far as audiences go, but I'm glad that studios didn't look at this, especially like New Line and Warner Brothers, and say, man, these guys are really one-hit wonders with the Saw film, and I don't know what else they'll be able to do. But going off of that, if you know, with Gabe saying that the cons are mostly surrounding the blandness of the film form, I'm curious, Tony, did you have any other cons that you wanted to highlight?
Honestly, no, because it's really just that main character, man. It really makes it doesn't make the movie unenjoyable, because again, the real star is James Wan, and he's still, when a director is in the zone and you're doing a bunch of, like, I could tell he's having a blast directing this with the practical effects, the gore. There's some really cool like tongue thing that they do that looks pretty cool. The mouth's ripped open.
Yeah.
His camera movements, but it's really just, it's the Jamie character. And honestly, I could say it's the writing, but I've seen some actors turn some super charismatic performances in off you know, some script that's not that great. You put, we mentioned the CW guys. If you throw a CW guy in here, I think they give a better performance. Those dudes from Supernatural, you throw Tom Welling in here, any of the Dawson's Creek kids, like, I think at that
Tom
time,
Welling. That's not a name I was expecting to hear in this podcast.
I think any of those guys would have been like, oh, I've done this role 1,000 times. I could totally turn in this role. And I think they would have delivered a better performance. It's weird, because I think, again, visually, it's everything you would expect from a James Wan movie. Maybe that's to its detriment too, is that it's kind of by the numbers for him.
Yeah.
But as a fan of his work, I mean, visually, I really like it. But yeah, it's that Jamie character, man. It's really where my cons fall in line with, is just, he's just a very nothing character. Even the scenes when he has Donnie Wahlberg with him, she's like, thank God Donnie Wahlberg's here. And it's fucking Donnie Wahlberg. He's not the greatest actor.
No, he's entertaining though.
He's got great screen presence though.
Yeah, he does. He has very good screen presence. Yeah.
He's a veteran. He's a pro. You know,
he's a new kid on the block.
He's a new kid on the block.
I keep bringing up The Sixth Sense, and of course, Donnie Wahlberg was in The Sixth Sense.
Yes. Yeah, but he loves playing that grizzled cop role, and I feel like here he probably just like, oh, of course I'll play that. But yeah, he's, in terms of my cons, it's still Jamie, man. I'm. It's funny that we all came in agreement on this, because watching it, I was like, man, this guy's just like absolutely doing nothing in every single scene. But cool. By
the way, Donnie Wahlberg does have the only dialogue I like in the movie. By the way, we didn't even talk about the dialogue, but I mean,
that plays into the writing too. I mean,
I guess it does, but it is a very specific category of writing.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, he's one of those characters that writes himself, right? I mean, and he got a few chuckles out of me. At some point he says, if you say I told you so, I'm going to shoot you. So
yeah, I like that. I like that little hint, and it shows his character well too. And it's weird, you know, talking about a movie you enjoy and then, you know, slagging on the acting is like a weird phenomena that I think is really, I mean, besides maybe action and sci-fi, Like, it's not a thing that you would watch a comedy and be like, oh yeah, the acting was terrible, the writing was terrible, but I had a great time. Most of the time you don't get that. And there are times where there are exceptions, but I feel like horror sort of breeds this natural environment for that. And I think you're absolutely right with what you said, Tony, where like, and I think a shining example of that is taking Jared Padalecki from Supernatural and putting him in Friday the 13th. His writing in Friday the 13th is not up to gold standard, just to let everybody know that. Right. If you watch Friday the 13th from 2009, you're not going to come away from it, wow, that was a really well written film. The dialogue was just on point. But you're going to see that he does a passable job with his performance. And I don't think the actor that plays Jamie does that. And I don't want to say it's his fault. Some actors just aren't made for dialogue that isn't tailored to the type of character that they play. And I don't think he's tailored to play this type of character. And I think you're absolutely
type of character. Right. Can you describe this character?
See, I think he would be good as just sort of like a guy he's not a lead. He's not a hero. He's not an emotional lead that you root for throughout an entire picture. He would be good as like one of the friends of the main character, or I don't know his role in True Blood, but I would imagine True Blood was a show that, from what I've seen, seems to have taken the actors to their strongest points of what they can do and made them do what they did well. So maybe he didn't do well in that. I don't know. I don't want to just slag on this guy because, I mean, if he's not doing a lot of work now, there's a chance he might see this. And I don't want to just sit here and shit on the poor guy just because I'm like, if he's got time on his hands and he sees this, I don't want to just be like, yeah, fuck that guy. But no, he did all right. I mean, he did all right with some of the material. There's some scenes where you do, there's one scene in particular that I'd want to highlight with him. Where they're in the whole that motel room, and he sort of puts Donnie Wahlberg up against the wall, and he's like, "This is my wife, man." That's the one point where I was like, "Okay, look at you, buddy. You might pick it up the rest of the movie." He didn't, but it's a good example of what he could have been. And I'm with you guys. I think it's one of the biggest cons of the movie. And before we move on to our intermission segment, I just want to add one more con in here, and I don't know if it's a big thing for everybody, but there are some moments where the CGI is not terrible in this movie, but there's a moment where Mary Shaw's face begins coming out of the dolls on the wall. Oh, God, yeah. I'm talking like Mortal Kombat Annihilation levels of CG here. It is horrific, and it genuinely took away from my enjoyment of what could have been a really cool scene, because if they would have just done like the eyes as the indicator, that would have been super cool, for the eyes to turn into those creepy white eyes that Mary Shaw has. The first doll, that's what you get at first. You get these like white eyes that you can identify immediately as that's Mary Shaw going into that doll. But then they do like the stretchy face coming out of it, and it just did not work at all. It was horrific. If they couldn't do it right, and this is something that I should have said in the Wolfman episode, if they couldn't get it right, don't do it at all. Find a way to do something that works and doesn't take away from the audience's enjoyment. And even at the time, I don't see the filmmakers being like, oh yeah, that was a really great CGI work. Yeah, good job, guys. Did that really well. So that was a big con for me, because that's a really impactful scene in terms of the movie. I don't think you walk away going, oh wow, that was great. But in terms of the movie, that's something that you should really care about. And I think that's a really bad thing to do at a scene that has that much weight. I'm curious, and I'll go to both of your opinions on this, but I'll start with you, Tony. Is this something that you noticed? Is this something that you saw as a con as well?
Yeah. And then I was like, I mean, it's like 2007. So yeah, they probably, they did it, and they're like, that's probably just because we're going to get, but I thought it was very goofy. It was very like Goosebumps, which goes back to my point of, if they would have went full slapstick with it, I don't think, most of us would care about the CGI in those moments. But I did notice it. I was like, that's dated, extremely dated. But that's also one, I think, of the more entertaining scenes in the movie too. Again, on paper, great idea, execution, which is crazy. They had a pretty high budget for a horror film, $20 million to play with here. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely noticed it. It was goofy. I just took it as that. I did laugh at it a good amount though, but I had fun with that. It's goofy stuff like that I enjoy.
And Gabe?
Oh God. I just feel like
it's never good when you start out your opinion with oh boy, oh God.
I just frankly I feel like I would sound like a dick like going after the CGI because it was 2000. What year was this? 2007.
2006, 2007. Yeah.
Yeah.
$20 million isn't going to buy you a Marvel level CGI team.
Yeah.
And I don't even. I mean, I'm one of those snobs. I don't want CGI in my horror movies. God damn it! I definitely don't think that.
So there's times where it works, but it doesn't.
There are times where it works, but when do you say, "Oh, I'm glad they did CGI and didn't trouble themselves with practical effects"? So I don't want to kick a horse while it's down, which is what the state of CGI from that period is. It's just a dated part of the movie. I don't know. Maybe if we saw it back in 2007, we would walk away with a different impression. You are right that is the only moment that stands out as laughably bad.
Yeah.
Which I guess, it's actually kind of commendable if you only have one moment like that. But it comes at what could have been the most effective sequence of the movie, which is why it is so tragic. So
yeah, and I gotta list that as a con for me. And like Tony said, the tongue stuff works well. I think it's a little weird. It kind of comes out of left field, and it leads to me thinking that and there's so much about this movie that I feel like it doesn't know exactly what it wants to be. Does it want to be like a buddy, like cop and suspect movie? Does it want to be a thriller? Does it want to be a mystery? Does it want to be a ghost movie? I feel like it doesn't really know that, but it really adds to that when you get to a scene that's supposed to be this big, landmark moment. You walk away from this and it's like you're supposed to be like, oh wow, did you see that scene where she was jumping from doll to doll? Like that shit was crazy. But then you walk away and you go, wow, did you see that scene where she was jumping from doll to doll? That was horseshit. And I hate to say that because it's a movie that I don't want to shit on. But there's no excuse for that, especially since the CGI with the eyes looked so good. Putting those eyes on there, that did look so good. So I'm disappointed that they didn't stick with that. And that wraps it up for me in the con section. I'm curious if you guys have anything else to add based on that.
No, I mean, just again, bland character.
Fuck you, Jamie.
Yeah, I know. Fuck Jamie. That's good. I feel bad. I feel bad, but for me, that's like the biggest thing when it comes to horror movies is I need somebody to gravitate towards. And, there's some great examples like Ready or Not, or, Halloween. There's not too much to Laurie, but there's a character that's you care because she's so relatable and sweet. And you just want to give her this hug. With this guy, I'm just I don't know if you're even human. Made in this factory, he's wife,
one of the dolls.
Yeah, his wife had more charisma in the first 5 minutes than I think he would have.
You mean the wife character?
The wife character.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I or even just a full this movie reminds me. I don't know if you guys have played the game Alan Wake.
Yeah.
You could have done something with just Donnie Wahlberg investigating this because I think the mythology is so cool.
Yeah.
And I think you could have just had Donnie Wahlberg going to this town investigating these things that are happening, and he's constantly shaving in every scene, but man, it's just that character takes you, and I think that's where a lot of the reviews probably came from, that 21% on Rotten Tomatoes and stuff. That's my biggest con, because I think the movie flows. There's not really much to it where I'm just oh, this is terrible, because I was entertained, and I think the scares work. And they're fun, and there's some goofy moments that I got a kick out of. But yeah, it's that main character in the writing form that just completely sinks most of this movie.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. And with that, I know everybody's been waiting for this moment. I'm just messing around. Nobody's been waiting for this. And I'll tell you this, if you're a lame person that wants to leave your phone, computer, whatever you want to do to go get you some coffee, go get you something to drink, go get you something to eat, this might be your time to do it. But if you're cool like me, you're going to take that phone, take that laptop with you to get your snacks and drinks, because we are heading into our intermission. You guys mind if we take a quick break? I got to run and grab something real quick.
I'm totally cool with that.
Okay. I'll be back in about 2 minutes.
Cool.
Tony, how's everything going with you, man?
Pretty good. How about you, man?
I can't complain, man. Can't complain at all. Man, I gotta say, like, now that we're kind of here just hanging out, waiting for Gabe to get back, man, I've really been digging the show, even though you guys completely just blocked me on that last episode. No, like, seriously though, like, you guys are really like, you guys already came into your own when I started watching you guys, but like, really, like, every week I'm like more surprised by like how good you guys flow, and hearing, of course, Gabe's just ridiculous opinions. I love hearing what he's gonna say. You never know what he's gonna say in an episode, do you?
No, sometimes he'll say something and I'm just like, please don't say that on the air. And he does it anyway, and then we usually will play it up to whatever it is. But yeah, man, thank you. I mean, we're happy that people are just watching.
Yeah.
We did it. I mean, in its first incarnation was just, let's defend movies that we think are, they were box office bombs and flops, and we'll say, well, they were not that bad.
Yeah.
But I feel like with that, it became more about the editing and less about our personas and charisma. We had a friend edit. I don't know if you've seen those episodes, like Jason X, Halloween 2007.
Yeah, I've seen those.
They're cool. They're cool, but like I felt like the ownership was gone, and I felt like as we were very thankful that how good those came out, but it just didn't feel like us. It felt like our editor was doing all the work, and we were just saying things that we knew would be turned into jokes later.
Yeah,
which was it's easy to do that, but we love doing the show this way, especially moving to. I mean, we did the live format, I think, in like March.
Yeah,
but we really wanted to push that ESPN style of, talking about the news. And man, I ran down stuff like Double Toasted. I don't know if you've seen those guys. I'm a huge fan of those. Schmoes Know.
Yeah. Oh, Schmoes Know is so great.
Yeah, like I was a huge fan back in the day of watching those guys, and
Schmoes
Know, AMC Movie Talk, and we were like, we can interject our personalities, bring people on, and just like keep it fresh every single week. So it's been crazy. It's been crazy that more and more people are discovering it. I mean, that Cody Leach episode, we weren't expecting that. I've never talked to the guy before.
That was great, man. Seeing him in there, and like the fact that he just like popped in and he was enjoying the show, and then he shared the show, which was like great, because then I was in there when we just started. I was watching the viewer count just climb, and it just kept going, and I was like, holy shit, what's going on? So that was really cool of him. That was really cool. And Bloodbath and Beyond is not a small channel either, so like the fact that they were just hanging out was really cool.
Yeah, he's been commenting on our stuff, I mean, for months. I mean, since I think like March, we did like an 80s, I think it was the 80s episode. You were in the comment section.
Yes,
on that one.
Yeah.
Or it might have been it was one of them, but yeah, we're thankful as all hell that people are discovering the show and just like to hear us talk movies, because we have a blast every week. It's truly awesome.
Yeah, well, before we get back into this, I want to say too, I think your guys' personality would be great on a podcast. If you guys did a Flopbuster podcast at any point, I think it would work really well. I think you guys would do well at that.
It would be sick. We've done a podcast before. It failed. We weren't. It was us and two other people, but the two other people, we just nothing was meshing.
Didn't vibe. Yeah.
No, it didn't vibe. I think it's the one of the rare things is me and Gabe, even though we have very, very different opinions on movies, and most of the time we agree, and there's times he says something out of left field or I do, but that's what makes it really fun to talk about. But you guys know that feeling too, when you find a good co-host or somebody you mesh with.
Shoot.
You could talk about anything, and if you're charismatic enough, I think people will find you and watch you. So we're just happy that that's suddenly taking place now.
Yeah, man, it's been a lot of fun to watch, and I got to thank Gabe here for bringing me onto his all nighter discussions podcast, because if he wouldn't have done that, or actually I think I got to thank him he had me on his YouTube channel to do a Rob Zombie's Halloween talk like years ago when I was making YouTube
videos.
Yeah. So after that, he started his podcast, had me on, and we had such fun talking that he just kept having me on. And then one day he's like, "Hey, I used to make these YouTube videos about, movies that weren't that bad. Maybe we could do." I was like, "That sounds fucking awesome." And so we picked it up. So it's a pleasure to have you on, because I think that's a lot of the story of you and Gabe. And of course, we have a Gabe here. You have a Gabe there.
Sure.
It'll be very confusing once we have Gabe on the show.
Yes.
But for now, if you guys are good, everybody good to get back into the episode.
Yes.
You good? You good, Gabe, as well?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Now we're gonna do your useless facts and then jump into the ugly.
Yeah. We'll do the useless facts and we'll jump into the ugly.
Let me ask this question: what are we gonna talk about in the ugly? Because we talked about the twist.
Yeah.
Which I feel like was the big thing. So is there something else that you guys can think of?
I think most of the things that we've kind of touched on. So what I think this time, since we sort of had to touch on them to talk about our cons. So I think I'll just kind of go one by one for the common complaints that I saw. There's there's 5 of them here. I'll just go through them and we'll just touch on them quickly. I think we've pretty much delved into everything pretty closely. So we'll just give our kind of final thoughts on these opinions. I think that if that's cool with you guys, what do you think?
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let me give these people some useless facts. Let me get ready to transition back into talk mode here. All right. All right. And here we go with the useless facts of this episode. Now is the time that I pull up my little script here that I got on my phone for some completely useless facts that nobody will ever be able to use. But if you're like me, you'll remember this for the rest of your life for absolutely no reason. Getting into things. John R. Leonetti, who did the cinematography for Dead Silence, is no stranger to creepy dolls. He also served as a cinematographer for Child's Play 3, which we've covered on this podcast before, subject of episode 2 of this podcast. He also worked on The Conjuring, which featured Annabelle at the beginning of the film. Incidentally, he would go on to direct the Annabelle film, which was contested, we'll say. But he would go on to direct that movie. He also directed Mortal Kombat Annihilation, for any of you film buffs out there. But weirdly enough, he would also direct a film called The Silence later on, which is a weird callback to this film here. And now we get into the part where I go real long-winded and lose my breath, because I'm just going to rant about this next one here until I can't breathe anymore. Okay. Actor Keir Gilchrist, who played the role of young Henry, would go on to star in the highly regarded 2014 horror film It Follows, alongside Daniel Zavato, who appeared in another movie with a theme of silence with the 2016 horror thriller Don't Breathe. Don't Breathe was produced by Sam Raimi, director of one of Gabe's picks for most underrated film ever in Darkman. Now, incidentally, Sam Raimi also directed the 2002 Spider-Man, which saw the appearance of Randy Poffo, aka the Macho Man Randy Savage, who played Bonesaw. Now, with Bonesaw, you had Savage portraying this interesting professional wrestling character, but Savage did not end his acting career with Spider-Man. No. Savage would also appear in the animated film Bolt with none other than Malcolm McDowell, who played Dr. Loomis in Rob Zombie's Halloween and Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, obligatory Halloween 2 reference. I'm fitting it in every episode. Fuck all of you. Moving on from that, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, of course, featured Danielle Harris, star of subject of the first episode, Halloween 5, which featured actress and personal acquaintance of mine, Tamara Glynn, who appeared in Freddy's Nightmares alongside Lar Park Lincoln, star of subject of our third episode, Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. And finally, Donnie Wahlberg, who played Detective Lipton, or as I call him, Detective Phillips Norelco, was a member of the popular boy band New Kids on the Block. And with that, I am actively out of breath, and we will move on very swiftly to our ugly section. Now, getting into that,
Beautiful, Connor.
If I
That
can,
was perfect.
if I could catch my breath here, I'm going to give you guys a chance to talk here after I feel like I literally will lose my voice tomorrow for work. We're going to get into some of the audience's common complaints with this. And now with this kind of movie, you don't see a lot of real angry, raving reviews. While you did see a couple that felt like they really wasted their time with this thing, there's not a whole lot of angry opinions. It's not really a movie that fosters this sort of hatred. And one of the reasons for that is one of the common complaints I saw was that it's a very forgettable film. We touched on a lot on the blandness of some of the characters, especially the lead character. Tony, throwing to you first here. How do you feel about this complaint about the film being very forgettable overall? I don't know if I agree with that it's completely forgettable, but I do see how people think personally, and I want to get your take on that.
Man, I think the filmmakers should take that as a win. That's what critics were saying about it back then, because I don't know if you guys remember this, but I feel like there was certain periods in horror history where movies were just being fucking annihilated by every single critic. And mid 2000s, man, critics were just like destroying movies left,
especially for horror.
Horror movies, yeah, but 100%, dude. Like Rob Zombie's Halloween.
Yeah. I mean, today we're in this A24 era where a certain strand of horror is being embraced, and it's one of those kind of hipster things where if you put a certain label on it, it kind of gives it this pastiche, right? So like X, Ty West's X, that's a movie I liked. If it had been marketed differently and presented less ironically, it would have been savaged by critics, once upon a time. I mean, Rob Zombie, we keep going back to that guy because he's kind of like ground zero for all of this in a way. And if you guys remember, the first Saw, even back in the day, was not well received by critics. In fact, I would go as far as to say that they shat on it.
Roger Ebert hated torture porn movies, and there would be horror films that he would praise, and I love Roger Ebert. I've read his books. Same. And I truly love the dude, but he just didn't like slasher movies. He didn't like torture porn stuff, and that was a lot of the reaction to horror movies. And I think the backlash led into movies like this where they just kind of brushed it off and they didn't really care about it. But I think that's where a lot of the criticism comes from. It's just like, it's forgettable, but I think they should take that as a win, because again, I feel like a lot of movies like The Hitcher, and regardless of what you think about them, I love The Hills Have Eyes, the Alexander Aja one.
Yeah.
It's got like a 48% Rotten Tomatoes. It's got a very polarizing reaction, but I feel, from 2005 to like 2007, 8, I feel like it was this weird period where horror movies were just fucking getting beat down by critics. I would say up until maybe Trick or Treat came out, then but I don't know how I feel about the forgettable criticism, because I think there's a lot of memorable moments in here. I think the third act is very memorable. I think the flashback is memorable. That's one of the most memorable things about the movie is the flashback.
Well, and Mary Shaw.
Shaw.
And the puppets, I think, are really...
And I really dig, it's a small moment, but the car sequence. I talked about how I compared it to Sam Raimi, and I really dig the moments where James Wan is just shining through and throwing everything at the screen. So I wouldn't say it's forgettable. Bland in some aspects, sure, but forgettable for me, no.
And Gabe?
Well, it's so interesting. Like, the history of horror movies and their relationship with critics is so arbitrary. And I'm a guy, like, I'm super skeptical when it comes to any sort of way you analyze this. So like Halloween, it's one of the most acclaimed movies ever, and then Carpenter makes a bunch of other movies that are on the level of Halloween. The critics just fucking they could not handle it. They could not handle the thing. And I mean, personally, I think the thing blows Halloween out of the water, but that's a completely separate discussion. But I always have to throw that out there. So, what we come to is a period where the critics do kind of start to win the culture war, because nobody wants to say they like torture porn. And if you can smear a filmmaker with that label, the popular kind of wisdom does start to turn on them. So I think this was kind of an ugly period for horror movies in the eyes of critics. I mean, thankfully, critics acknowledged that James Wan and Leigh Whannell did try something much different, and by their own standards, at least much more tasteful. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you guys. That was a dark time for horror in general, and critics did not make it any better. And I'm struggling to even think of a movie from this time, a horror movie that was critically acclaimed. I mean,
yeah, I mean, no, like but that's the thing to like, I think like 2003 through like 2006, I think the one that I can really kind of highlight is The Devil's Rejects. Weirdly enough, that received a lot of praise. In fact, Roger Ebert gave it 2 thumbs up.
Gave it to him and Richard Roper.
Yeah. So
that's
it's
what
like,
I'm saying. It's so arbitrary. Like, yeah, I love The Devil's Rejects, but to say that movie is tasteful and is not about, human suffering, exploits it, versus these other movies, I can't even get behind that as somebody who does love that movie.
And that's a whole nother conversation too. And I'm sure there's going to be a film that we cover eventually that will cover that topic. But I'm curious, before I move on to the next complaint, did you find this film forgettable, Gabe? Because I know Tony talked about, there's a lot of moments that he retains. I know for me, and I agree with what you said there, Tony, because I feel like the moments that really shine through are the moments that, and that you remember, are the moments that really James Wan kind of takes it. They're the James Wan-isms of the film. Yeah. Those are the ones that really kind of stick with me and make me remember core moments of this movie. So Gabe, being somebody that watched it for the first time, is this a movie that you're going to walk away from and eventually you think it's one of those that you'll just forget all about, or do you find that to be not really a fair criticism?
So I watched this movie specifically to talk about it. So I watched it to analyze it.
Yeah. And that's a thing too,
to engage with it. Right. So I'm a little biased here. But as somebody who just spent a long time calling out its blandness overall, the movie's bland identity, I think, it's hard for me to argue that this is a movie that will stay with me, that will resonate with me. And if I'm in the mood to watch a James Wan movie, this is not even top 5 movies I would choose.
Yeah.
Right. But it will always be that curiosity to me, that movie that represented a trial run, and I like trial run movies. I at least like to talk about them and to keep them around for historical purposes. So it's got plenty of things that will give it shelf life for me, but to the average moviegoer who's just looking for a fun, scary horror movie, I don't blame them for not remembering this movie too well.
And that's fair. And with the blandness, like it's a perfect transition to one of the other things that was very common through both critical reviews and, when you go down Letterboxd and you read the reviews, like that's, in my opinion, Letterboxd has been a great example of just how to gauge audience, the pulse of what an audience feels about a film is you go on Letterboxd, and there are some people who are trolls, and that's going to be the case with anything like IMDb ratings and anything. But going to Letterboxd and looking at some of the reviews, as well as some of the critical reviews, lots of complaints of the film being boring. I think there is a blandness to it, but I wouldn't necessarily completely agree with the fact that it is boring. There's no point in the movie that I feel like, as Gabe from Flopbuster would say, as Flopbuster's Gabe, I fell asleep during it. That's one of my favorite things that he says on that show. I had no point in time for this movie that I felt like I was going to fall asleep. And that might just be Gabe's oldness. I'm just messing around.
But most definitely is.
Yeah. But in all seriousness, I'm just, messing around here. But I didn't find the film boring. I thought the beginning was a little off. I didn't really love the first maybe 20 minutes of the film. There's some really good moments within there that I think really stand out. Specifically, like there's like a scene with like a sheet over the head of like the wife, and there's some talking, and there's some creepy stuff in there, but overall it's just not that great. But there's not a moment in this film that I'm like, oh my God, I wish I was watching something else. This is so boring. That's just me. And moving from that, Tony, do you think this film crosses the line from bland to boring, or do you think it sort of stays within that lane of just, it's got some bland parts, but I wasn't bored?
No, yeah, I agree with that. There's a bunch of bland things in this movie besides the actor, obviously, who we've been harping on the entire time.
This guy the whole time.
Shitting on this guy. I feel bad for him.
You would feel so weirded out to hear this podcast of people shitting on this movie like 20 years later or however long it's been.
But obviously the story, and like it is a product of its time. It looks and feels like every other horror movie. It looks and feels like the Fog remake, and again, The Hitcher and Stay Alive, and all these movies that came out in this 3-year time frame where they were either made by Platinum Dunes or the Weinsteins and Twisted Pictures. But I think what really sets it apart from those is that, again, I keep going back to it, I really like James Wan because he is a bag of tricks director. He can really just do a lot. He's one of those guys just like grabs that camera and just uses it as a character. And I feel like here in the horror sequences, that's what really makes it stand out, is those moments. So for me, bland in the storytelling, but in the filmmaking, no.
And Gabe, do you think it crosses the line from bland to boring? You've talked about your feelings about how bland the film is, especially on your first watch. Did it cross that line for you?
That's a more interesting question, because where is the line between bland and boring? It did sometimes I felt like the movie was struggling to hold my attention. Other times it grabbed me again. So it's a very uneven movie in that sense.
That's fair.
It's a short movie and it feels short. I mean, it
does feel short.
I was kind of shocked by that, and I don't know if that's a pro or a con, but at least it doesn't waste your time, which I really appreciate. So to call the movie boring to me is unfair. To say that you were bored is a different thing, you know?
Yeah.
Which is funny to say, but I think there is a distinction. So no, I would not call the movie boring. Then again, I know about the production history behind it, and to me that always makes these kinds of movies more interesting, right, to watch.
Well, of course. And you know, I think it's an interesting point that you made there with saying that, you know, I don't know that anybody could really say a film is boring. I think a general audience census could tell you that most of the audience did think it was boring, but there are plenty of films where, you know, I've got friends that tell me like, oh, don't watch this, it is so boring. And then I watch it and I'm thrilled. But then there's movies that people tell me it scared the shit out of them, and then I'm bored out of my effing mind. And so Blair Witch Project. Sorry.
Whoa. You thought you just slipped that in? You thought I would just let that go? Oh, sir.
But moving forward from that.
Wait, how old were you when you saw the Blair Witch? I gotta ask you. How late to the party were you?
I was no, hold on. Blair Witch Project. The first, I was 13.
So you heard the hype about it first before you watched it, right?
100%, yeah.
Okay. I have a friend in the same situation, heard the hype, watched it, was bored to tears.
Yeah.
And could not wrap his head around why people loved that movie. I feel like, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I just think it's one of those movies where it's like you have to be, I feel like, in that moment in the right state of mind, away from any kind of preconceived notions about it.
Well, that's that's frankly how I feel about Halloween, the original Halloween. I think that's a movie that's much more of its time than people let on. And I think the experience of seeing it when it opened versus seeing it after the overwhelming praise has really piled on by this point. It's really different. So I can sympathize with you there, Connor.
Yeah.
But no Blair Witch slander on this podcast.
Well, and that's the thing. And I don't want you to think that I'm saying either. And I want to make that distinction. I'm not saying again that it's a boring movie, and I'm not even going to cross the line to say that I don't understand the appeal. I think it's a revolutionary film. I think there's so much about it that really just kind of changed the way that people made movies and how low budget filmmakers could sort of get their start. And for that, I really appreciate it. And I respect it. And it's a higher. I definitely don't hate it. I do hate Book of Shadows, but that's different conversation.
Next episode, Book of Shadows.
Yeah, next episode, Book of Shadows. We're having Tony on in the future. We're going to cover Book of Shadows. But truthfully, it goes back to my point where with that movie, I was bored out of my mind. But I had a very close friend who we have very similar opinions on movies. One of my favorite drama movies ever was a movie called Lady Bird with Saoirse Ronan. I absolutely love that movie. I think it's one of it came out in a year that was just stacked with fantastic movies. But I loved it. I loved everything about the movie, and he thought it was absolutely boring as hell. So there are those. I don't know that it's fair that anybody can say, hey, this movie's boring. I think it's one of those things where, and I'm really weird about this, but I think wording is extremely important when you talk about anything. And I think saying this movie bored me is much more appropriate than being like, yeah, this is a boring film. That's a conclusion you can draw based on plenty of reviews. If you see people time after time saying, I was bored with this. It's not something you really have to label the movie as. So I'm with you. I actually really dig what you said there. That's something that I'll probably use in the future. If I am bored by a film, I won't say this was incredibly boring. I'll say this bored me to death. But no, I mean, like, I completely agree with you guys. I don't think there was a moment that I was absolutely bored. I think, Gabe, you had a few moments that you didn't it didn't really grab your attention, but that's something I can understand. I can see how somebody can go into this and really only get into certain parts of it. But I can certainly see one of the two of the criticisms that I'm going to group together here, because we talked about them sort of in tandem throughout the entirety of this episode, through our pros, through our cons. And now we're here in the ugly. Through the good, the bad, and the ugly, we're gonna talk about the bad writing and acting, which is something that was consistent upon reviews from critics, reviews from audience members. They did not enjoy the acting. They did not enjoy the writing. I mean, we've talked about this the whole episode, but I want to see, I guess, starting with you, Tony, was there anything you kind of wanted to add on top of that? Anything that you had to add?
The dialogue is pretty weak, and it's hammy in a way where, like, the actors are taking it 100% seriously. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, again, I use Malignant as an example because it feels like very similar to this, except in Malignant, it's hammy for the sake of being hammy, and everybody in the movie knows that they're supposed to be over the top in every line delivery. And I feel like that's a huge missed opportunity here, where the actors are completely taking it seriously. Jamie, obviously, because it's Jamie. But I would agree with that. I would say it's the writing's not a strong suit. I think the dialogue is pretty weak, other than some kind of funny things that Donnie Wahlberg says and little quirky moments that he brings to his character. It's the dialogue's not a strong suit of it, so I'd agree with that.
And the acting doesn't help. I mean, I can completely agree with this point personally. I think it's easy to see why people would say the writing is bad and why the acting is bad. And like we've said, we completely sympathize with such a talented person like Leigh Whannell, who would go on to do such. He did better things before this with Saw, but would go on to do much better things over time. So for me, I completely agree with that. And Gabe, you've talked about it as well. I'm curious if you have anything that you wanted to sort of add on top of this point.
Well, you got to remember, these are young filmmakers who, to be blunt, didn't direct like Oscar-winning performances in Saw. So it's not like they were evolving, and that is one skill that they hadn't particularly perfected yet. I think there are brilliant performances in later James Wan and Leigh Whannell movies, actually, like Elizabeth Moss in The Invisible Man, like just should have won an Oscar. So
and the main actor from Upgrade, I always forget his name.
Logan Marshall Green.
Yeah, Logan Marshall Green.
No, his name is Tom Hardy 2.0.
The growth that broke off of Tom Hardy and grew into a person.
Yeah, but look, as somebody who is trying to be a filmmaker, a screenwriter who has directed performances, I totally feel about like performances in horror movies in a really different way. Yeah, it in a sympathetic way, in just a, as long as people are trying, I can go along for the ride, sort of way. It's only when actors phone it in that really starts to grind my gears, which nobody in this movie does. I think everybody was really trying to do their best, even if they were miscast. The writing, we keep going back to that, because when you don't have the writing, what do you have?
Yeah.
And you can, James Wan had a vision, and unfortunately that was all restrained by the studio system. It's something that happens to a lot of kind of sophomore slump situations, where they get a new director and they put a leash on him, even though like what made him a star was his total commitment to his style. Yeah, I mean, it's a story that's been told so many times. Dead Silence is just one of many, many examples of this phenomenon. So in that sense, I don't have a bone to pick with it. I have a bone to pick with the system that produces it, right?
Yeah, and I think, like, for lack of a better term, I think there's like a wokeness that you have when you kind of get into like the filmmaking side of things. Because when you get into the film world, and even when you work at a very minor level, like I've done, writing a lot of short films, writing feature films that never get made due to budgetary problems, and writing for independent filmmakers, even on that small level, you just sympathize with a movie that tries so hard. And I don't think there's a single aspect besides the CGI of Dead Silence that doesn't try so hard to make it a good movie. The director tried, the writer tried, the actors tried, but it just didn't click. And I think I hate to say the writing is bad, because I feel like that puts blame on the writer. I just don't think it worked. And nothing clicked with the writing to, like, translating into what the actors portrayed on screen. And it's sad to see, because I think there's a lot of things that could have really turned out well. And if the writing was just that much better, and the acting was that much better, we could not even, this movie could be ineligible for this podcast, despite, the other issues that it has. And speaking of that, there's one more real common complaint that we get with this film. And we touched on it a little bit before, but we got to talk about the twist. People think it's horrible. People think it's terrible. Again, if you haven't seen the movie, you have no interest in seeing it, it's revealed that this father character that we're introduced to is what the film calls the perfect puppet. He is a dead human male who they have put puppet parts in so that he can talk. It feels really stupid saying it. I promise that it's not as dumb on screen, even if you don't end up liking it. But yeah, and that's sort of revealed, and there's a couple of twists, I guess, because it's revealed that, like, they're going after Jamie because his family was involved in the death of Mary Shaw, and that's why she's going after all these people, because they were involved. And then the wife was killed because he wasn't the last Shaw. There was a baby in her stomach, and I guess that's alluded to as well. So it's a twist that I don't think audiences would really see coming. Maybe I'm being naive on that, because I didn't see it coming. But it's certainly one that people didn't like. And Tony, I got to throw to you for this one again. We touched on it earlier, but I guess last thoughts on the twist, where you land on the side of the coin, which side you land on, and any comments that you have on it.
I mean, it goes back to what I said earlier. I touched on it. It does feel a little tacked on, and I think flushing it out could have softened the blow, especially including that scene that you described.
Yes.
But as it stands, it's a strange twist, but it's a movie where you have to accept a lot of things. So with that being said, it's an entertaining twist. I don't know if it's one that completely works, or I would say is good. But
I love the wording on that. Just tiptoe. I
just,
wouldn't say it's good, but
I mean, I totally, to tell you the truth, I forgot about that. Like, I totally forgot the twist. Again, it's been a few years, so I was like, I'm like, I don't remember this happening. Could have, but yeah, no, I think I guess I fall on the side of people that call out the twist. It's so weird. It's I feel like, again, it can work on paper. It should work saying it, but the execution is just a bit bizarre. And it does, like you guys mentioned the Saw thing, right? Saw reveals the twist. You got the music and the montage and stuff. I'm like, wow, like that's very similar. I didn't realize how recycled that felt until you guys both mentioned it. But yeah, it does feel like leftovers from something better.
Yeah. And I think, what you mentioned there is something that Gabe brought up in his point earlier, where it's just like, there's just something there that didn't connect. And, I think, as somebody who's going to defend the twist myself, I can say that there's a lot that I really enjoyed about it. And again, I did not personally see any of that coming. And when I watch it again, when I've seen this movie a few times, watching it for the second time or third time, whatever, I don't know how many times I've seen it, probably about 4 or 5 since I've first watched it. Just noticing little things, the dad's movements are a little funny, and then it makes a little bit more sense now. The fact that he looks more dead throughout the movie, it makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, I mean, it's very strange. And Gabe, building on what you kind of said earlier, I'm curious if you have anything else you wanted to add about this twist, or if you just wanted to straight up shit on it, you could do that too. I'm not gonna stop.
I don't. I called it an afterthought because that's what it felt like. I did notice that the dad looked weird. He acted weird. And I was like, is this dad even going to play a particularly interesting role in the story? It felt like he was given this big entrance. It didn't insult my intelligence. I think I should get that out of the way.
That's a fair point.
Right. That's what I would say a twist actually does cross the line into just bad territory. But I think the best twists redefine the movie for you. The Sixth Sense gets a whole another layer after that twist of meaning, and Star Wars, think about how much it adds after we learn that Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Wait, what? No. Imagine I've never seen that. I got like a whole Star Wars collection here. Get Out and Saw are two also good examples of that, where
and those are in horror.
It changes the movie. Yeah.
You go back and rewatch Saw, knowing everything we know, and it becomes completely different. I don't know what it's going to add to Dead Silence, knowing that Jamie's father wasn't alive.
Was a puppet.
His estranged father, who we didn't even like and seemed to hate. If his father was like a supportive character, or if we were made to like him, that'd be one thing, maybe. So it's just like there was nothing dynamic. There was nothing. Nothing had been turned 180.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And truthfully, the fact that there's really only, and I looked, I wanted to get as many keys from, like missing parts for me, because it is a movie that I did enjoy. I wanted to grab as many missing parts that I could, just to figure out what people didn't like. And the fact that I was only really able to find these 5, where normally when we watch something on this show, we're sort of condensing down what people are saying about the film and just picking the real most common ones. But these are the only complaints that I saw. But it's strange because they're weighted so heavily for some people. And transitioning into our final point here, to give you guys a verdict, I want to start off because truthfully, this movie just kind of makes me sad, because
that's not a good sign.
Well, no. It's you're going to understand why I say that in a second, because like you said, and like we've touched on a few times, there's parts of this movie that feel recycled from Saw, but there's also we build the template for James Wan's the rest of his career up until he started doing, like Fast and Furious and Aquaman and things like that. You see the template for Insidious, you see the template for The Conjuring, more so the first films and the second film in the case of The Conjuring. I'm sorry, in case of the Insidious, I think Insidious 2 takes heavy inspiration from scenes in Dead Silence. And even Annabelle, I mean, the way Annabelle's eyes move, the way Annabelle the way Annabelle looks, I think is heavily inspired by James Wan's creation of a lot of the dolls in this film, because if you look at Annabelle in real life, it's a Raggedy Ann doll. So that choice feels a lot like something that calls back to a film like this. So you see this template and you see sort of recycled ideas taken from a movie that did work in Saw, but it doesn't land with anybody. I don't know anybody that really swears by this movie as one of their favorites. I don't know anybody that talks about it when they're discussing things like Insidious and The Conjuring. And I don't know anybody who feels like I do, where if I'm going on a James Wan marathon, this is in there. I easily put this in there because it's a perfect progression throughout his career. I think it's an essential component in James Wan's career and what is to come. So it makes me really sad that people are disappointed with it. And to an extent, I am too. There's a lot missing. I think it should be a classic with the components that are so great. You got James Wan at the helm. You got Leigh Whannell behind the script. You got the character of Mary Shaw, which could have done wonders for becoming a horror icon, like The Bride in Black would go on to do, or like Valak would go on to do. So it makes me really sad. And I wish that character would have had a redemption. Maybe we'll see it one day. I doubt it. But at the end of the day, despite my disappointment, I'm going to be the first to give my verdict and say it's not that bad. I want to say really great. I want to say really good. I want to say it's over the level of not that bad and crosses over to where I put Halloween 5 in the first episode. But truthfully, I can't say that. There's, with every bit of potential it has something that drags that potential down. And that's where I'm going to leave it. And I'm going to toss it to you, Tony, because this was your pick. And I want to see if your pick lands in that not that bad category that we titled this podcast after.
All right. So when you guys told me to pick a movie, I struggled finding one. Because I kept the one because it had to be horror. And if I'm like, all right, if I'm picking a movie that's not that bad, I could do something that's like a comedy. I like a lot of really stupid comedies. But I was searching through, I'm like, man, I remember this James Wan movie, and I remember being excited for it. And again, getting the posters and renting it from Blockbuster with my cousins, and
of course,
having some pretty decent memories of it, and thinking that it had some pretty scary moments. And I saw it again maybe like 5-6 years back, and then rewatching it now, a lot of those moments still held up. A couple of the jump scares got me. And I think at the end of the day, if it's supposed to be this scare machine that just is throwing everything at you, and there's a scare every few minutes, this movie does accomplish that. It also comes with some pretty terrible storytelling and a horrible lead character, but I thought Billy the doll was Jamie. Yeah. The Billy character, the Billy doll, was memorable, good precursor to Annabelle. Mary Shaw was terrifying. Like that again, that moment in the flashback is so cool. So yeah, I do gotta say it's not that bad, or in the Flopbuster case, it's fine. So but I felt like it's a weird movie because there's so many great positives to it where I'm like, man, I could see what he's going to become. And then there's a lot of things where there's a lot of missteps. But
you left wanting more.
Yeah, it's a weird feeling, but you leave this going, this isn't nearly as bad as critics made it seem. And it's a movie that, like, if it's on TV, sure, I'll throw it on. Like, there's some really genuinely cool moments in this. So it's not that bad.
And Gabe, I'm really curious to see where you land on this about being a first-time viewer.
I'm curious to see where I land on it, because
I love the shaky.
The movie didn't inspire any animus. I did think to myself at a couple points, this is pretty dumb. And I don't know how many times I said to myself, damn, that was cool. Or like holy shit, I'm gonna think about that one for a while. Well, you got to compare it to not just how much you like the movie, but where do you think this movie stands up, compared to its legacy? Is it deserving of its legacy? And this movie is known as the kind of crappy sophomore slump for these guys that led to them making Insidious. I would call it a sophomore slump. I wouldn't say it's their fault, but it is. So I don't think the consensus is super wrong about this movie, but I also don't think the consensus is that this is a particularly terrible movie. So many things to weigh here, so many factors to take into account, but I'm going to land on it's not that bad. It had a lot of interesting moments peppered throughout, just enough to give it some taste. It had, the beloved Donnie Wahlberg, which put him in more movies, more of him and less of Mark, in my opinion. And we'll see if that stays in the edit. And as a fellow filmmaker, I'm really stretching now to find hard defenses, that I can say. But no, I do enjoy seeing their journey that they're taking on with this movie, the way that they're evolving, trying new things. Yes, some things were recycled from Saw, but I don't think that was done cynically. I just think that they were like really proud of what they accomplished with Saw, and they wanted to expand on that. They didn't want to disappoint their fans. So yeah, it's not that bad. I would happily watch it again. I probably not anytime soon, but it's not an idea that I'm against.
And that's fair. And I'm glad we landed on the same platform here, because it's really tough covering a movie that's been given the forgettable tag, because you never know where you're going to land on that. It could be something where you just say, this is like this is like so many other movies that you watch once and you forget about, and for that reason it's that bad, and you never know where you're going to fall. So I'm really glad we landed on this, and I'm happy to see this film kind of get some justice. And I hope anybody watching at home or listening at home, listening on your way to work, whatever you decide to do with this, I really hope that if you've never seen this, you'll give it a chance, even knowing some of the spoilers. And if you've seen it before, give it another shot. Maybe it's not that bad as you remember if you really didn't enjoy it. And I hope everybody kind of takes that away from this, as this is an opportunity to really kind of see what James Wan and Leigh Whannell would become later in their career. It's a sophomore slump, like you said. I think that's a really good term. I think I'll kind of use that as a title, but I hope people get a chance to watch this. And I just want to be the first to thank our guests today. Tony, you're our first guest, and we were absolutely thrilled to be able to get you on. Big fan myself of the Flopbuster program. I'm curious if you be okay with giving a plug to your stuff. We're happy to push it. Of course, if you're watching on YouTube, there's going to be a link to his channel in the description. If you're listening on a podcast platform, we'll be sure to put it in the description of the episode. But let us know where we can find you, and tell us about Flopbuster.
Yeah, so Flopbuster is a movie show that we do every Thursday. We cover the movie news for the week, box office report, all those things, give our opinion. And then I do sprinkle a little bit of movie reviews that I see, movies that I see throughout the week, early screenings, whatever it is. And if you just want a place to talk about all things movies, whatever genre it is, we'll talk about it. And that's really what our goal is with that show, is just creating this really welcoming environment where movie fans can just talk about the things that they love. You can find us on the Flopbuster movie show. And then me and Gabe have separate TikToks where we do movie reviews on there too. His are in Spanish for some reason. He still hasn't told me why, but if you enjoy watching the show, we do that as well. And thank you guys for having me on too. I was so happy to come on and be the first guest. It's an honor.
Oh, thanks, man. I mean, and thank you for bringing this movie to my attention, because it did make for an interesting conversation piece. And I'm really excited to check out all of your stuff. And I'm sure our audience will really enjoy Flopbusters.
Oh man, they're gonna love it. If you love this show especially, you're gonna love Flopbuster. Come hang out on Thursdays because you'll see me in the comments if I'm still not if I'm unblocked by then. We had a little accidental blocking amongst the porn bot comments. But no, in all seriousness, come hang out on Thursday nights. It's a real blast. If you're a member of the horror community, you might see some familiar faces in the comments every once in a while. And it's a lot of fun. And of course, if you're coming from Flopbuster to this show, we release our podcasts bi-weekly on Thursdays in the morning. So Thursdays are days for us as well. Once you get done with us, go check out Flopbuster, of course. But if you want to find us, we are on Facebook and Instagram at Not That Bad Pod, and we are on Twitter at Not That Bad, M as in movie, P as in podcast. We're trying to grow and get to the level of our guests here at Flopbuster. They're growing at a great rate. It's great to see what they're doing. So Gabe, if you want to take us to the outro, I just want to say again, thanks for coming on, Tony, and hopefully we can have you on again in the future. We'd love to cover maybe some of those comedies you had in mind or something else in the future. So you're always welcome back.
Yes, I can't say it enough that we are so excited to be broadening outside of horror.
Yes, and which we'll do in the next episode. Next episode will be our first non-horror film. I'm so excited about it. It's my pick. I'm not saying shit though, so fuck all of you.
All right. Well, with that being said, this is Not That Bad Podcast. I'm your co-host, Gabe Tice.
I'm Connor. Thanks, Tony.
And we are signing out. Catch us next time, y'all, because we are ready to piss you off with this next movie. I promise you. Okay.
Signing off, everybody.
Peace out.